The floor-to-ceiling windows of the 31st floor office offered a breathtaking view of the city below. The skyline shimmered under the midday sun, a kaleidoscope of glass and steel stretching toward the heavens. Inside, the air hummed with an energy unique to the powerful, the quiet yet undeniable pulse of ambition and control. Gabriel Vaughn, the self-made millionaire and CEO of Vaughn Enterprises, sat behind a massive mahogany desk, flipping through a report with practiced indifference. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his broad shoulders, his graying temples lending him an air of authority that few dared to challenge. His employees respected him, but none dared to cross him. Gabriel had built his empire on discipline, sharp instincts, and an almost inhuman ability to compartmentalize. To them, he was a man of steel, unshakable, invincible. But beneath the polished surface, Gabriel's life was a fragile mosaic of secrets. He leaned back in his chair, his steely blue eyes drifting to the corner of the desk where a photo frame lay face down, as it always was. The photo had been there for years, its presence a cruel reminder of a chapter in his life he had buried long ago. Gabriel rarely allowed himself to think about it, and when he did, it was always with a heavy sense of guilt and loss. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. "Come in," he said, his voice as controlled as ever. The door opened, and Hannah Keller stepped inside. She was one of his newest hires, a junior analyst with an impressive resume and a quiet determination that Gabriel had noticed from the start. In her late 20s, Hannah was bright-eyed and confident, though she carried an air of quiet sadness that she masked with professionalism. "Mr. Vaughn, I have the projections you asked for," she said, holding a sleek tablet. "Leave them on the desk," he replied without looking up. Hannah hesitated, glancing at the stacks of papers and files cluttering the desk. "Are you sure? It's a bit crowded." Gabriel sighed, gesturing dismissively. "Fine, just set it wherever you can." As she approached the desk, her gaze fell on the face-down photo frame. Without thinking, she picked it up, intending to make space for the tablet. But the moment she flipped it over, her breath hitched. It was an old photograph, slightly worn at the edges, of a young boy and a girl standing in front of a small house. The boy, about 10 years old, wore a solemn expression, his arms protectively wrapped around the girl, who couldn't have been older than 6. Her face was hauntingly familiar, her wide, innocent eyes staring straight at the camera. "I've seen her before," Hannah murmured almost to herself. The words pierced the air like a gunshot. Gabriel froze, his entire body going rigid. Slowly, he looked up, his icy composure cracking ever so slightly. "What did you just say?" Hannah blinked, realizing too late what she had said aloud. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Where?" Gabriel's voice was sharp, almost desperate. "Where have you seen her?" Hannah hesitated, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. I don't know for sure, but she looks like someone I used to know. Someone from my childhood." Gabriel's hands gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. "What was her name?" "I don't remember," Hannah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I remember her face. She lived in the same foster home as me when I was a kid." The words hit Gabriel like a freight train. His vision blurred, and for a moment, the carefully constructed walls around his past threatened to crumble. The photograph in the frame wasn't just a relic of his youth. It was a window to a chapter of his life he had spent decades trying to forget. "Leave," he said abruptly, his voice strained. Hannah stepped back, alarmed by the sudden change in his demeanor. "Mr. Vaughn, are you?" "I said leave," he barked, his voice breaking for the first time. Hannah nodded quickly, placing the photo frame back on the desk and retreating from the room. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving Gabriel alone with the memories he had fought so hard to bury. He picked up the photo frame, staring at the faces frozen in time. The boy was him, and the girl, Emily, he whispered, his voice cracking. Alone in her office, Hannah sat at her desk, her mind racing. The man in the photo, Gabriel Vaughn, was the boy who had always been at her side in the foster home, the one who had shielded her from harm and taught her how to stand tall even when the world felt cruel. But Emily, the name floated just out of reach in her memory, tugging at the edges of her thoughts. She hadn't thought about those years in so long. Why did the photo feel so significant now? Hannah glanced toward Gabriel's office, her chest tightening with unease. She had seen cracks in his polished exterior, cracks that hinted at pain and loss. And now, for the first time, she wondered if their lives had been intertwined long before either of them realized. Gabriel sat in his office long after Hannah had left, the photo frame still clutched in his hands. The room, usually a haven of order and control, felt suffocating now. The photograph, once buried under stacks of reports, was no longer just an artifact of the past. It was a key, unlocking memories he had fought to suppress. Emily. Her name echoed in his mind, dredging up images he had tried to banish. A small, fragile girl with trusting eyes, holding his hand as they navigated the harsh realities of foster care. They had been inseparable once, bound by the shared trauma of abandonment. But then, Gabriel slammed the photo face down on his desk, his breathing ragged. He couldn't afford to think about what had happened. Not now. Not when his carefully curated life was on the brink of unraveling. Hannah couldn't concentrate. She sat at her desk, her gaze fixed on her screen, but the spreadsheet before her might as well have been in a foreign language. Her mind kept circling back to the photograph. The girl, Emily. Hannah closed her eyes, trying to summon a clear memory. Her time in foster care had been a blur of faces and places, none of them permanent. But the girl in the photo stood out, her face etched in Hannah's memory like a faint but unerasable sketch. She had known her. She was certain of it. But how and why had Gabriel Vaughn kept a photo of her? Unable to resist the pull of curiosity, Hannah opened her laptop and began searching. She started with foster care records, using what little information she remembered about her childhood. The process was slow and frustrating, the digital breadcrumbs of her past leading her in circles. Just as she was about to give up, she found it. A scanned record of the group home she had stayed in as a child. The list of names was short, but one stood out immediately. Emily Vaughn. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. Vaughn. The same name. The connection was undeniable. The next day, Hannah arrived at work early, her nerves jangling like frayed wires. Gabriel's office door was ajar, and she hesitated, debating whether to go in. She had to say something, but the memory of his outburst the day before made her cautious. Summoning her courage, she knocked lightly on the door. "Come in," Gabriel said, his voice flat. She stepped inside, finding him at his desk, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. The photograph was gone, but the tension in the room was palpable. "Mr. Vaughn," she began, her voice tentative. I think I owe you an explanation." He looked up sharply, his gaze pinning her in place. "What are you talking about?" "The photo," she said, her throat tightening. "I recognized the girl because I knew her. I stayed in the same group home as Emily Vaughn when I was a child." Gabriel's face paled, his carefully controlled mask cracking. "You knew her?" Hannah nodded, her voice soft. "Not well. I was very young, but I remember her. She was kind, quiet. She always seemed sad." Gabriel's hands gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. "Did she ever mention me?" Hannah hesitated, the weight of his question pressing down on her. "No," she admitted. "But I didn't know her for long. She disappeared one day. Nobody told me why." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his eyes clouded with anguish. "She didn't just disappear," he said, his voice barely audible. "She was taken from me." Hannah's breath caught. "Taken?" "We were separated," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "The foster system is a machine, and we were just pieces. One day she was gone, and no one would tell me where she'd been sent. I searched for years, but I never found her." The room fell silent, the weight of his confession settling over them like a heavy blanket. "Why do you still have that photo?" Hannah asked gently. Gabriel looked away, his gaze fixed on the window. "Because it's all I have left of her. That photo is the last time we were together. She was my sister." Hannah's heart twisted. The cold, unyielding man she had known for months was suddenly human. His grief laid bare before her. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Gabriel turned back to her, his expression hardening once more. "I don't need your pity," he snapped. "It's not pity," she replied firmly. "It's understanding." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Gabriel seemed to waver. Then he nodded curtly. "Thank you, but this doesn't change anything. We have work to do." Hannah hesitated, then left the office, her mind racing. The image of Gabriel's grief-stricken face stayed with her, and she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let this end here. That evening, Hannah sat in her apartment, poring over the records she had found. If Gabriel couldn't find Emily, maybe she could. But as she dug deeper, she found something that made her blood run cold. A police report. The details were sparse, but the words were unmistakable. Emily Vaughn, missing, presumed deceased. Hannah stared at the screen, her hands trembling. If Gabriel didn't know, how could she tell him? Hannah stared at the screen, the words swimming before her eyes. Emily Vaughn, missing, presumed deceased. The weight of the discovery pressed on her chest like a physical burden. She had gone digging for answers, but this wasn't what she had hoped to find. The police report was brief, offering only the cold, clinical details of Emily's disappearance. It stated that she had vanished from a foster home at the age of 8, and despite an extensive search, no conclusive evidence had been found. The case was eventually closed, her file marked as unsolved. Hannah felt a pang of guilt for unearthing something so devastating, but she knew she couldn't keep this from Gabriel. He deserved to know, no matter how painful the truth might be. The next morning, she arrived at the office with a sense of dread. Gabriel was already there, standing by the window with his back to her. He didn't turn when she knocked softly on the door. "Come in," he said, his voice void of emotion. Hannah stepped inside, clutching a folder with printouts of the report and related documents. She hesitated, unsure how to begin. "I found something," she said finally. Gabriel turned, his expression sharp and guarded. "What is it?" She took a deep breath and handed him the folder. "It's about Emily." He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. As he read, his face changed, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to a grief so raw that it made Hannah want to look away. "They think she's dead," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's just what the report says," Hannah offered gently. "There's no proof. She could still be out there." Gabriel's hands trembled as he set the folder on the desk. "I spent years looking for her," he said, his voice breaking. "I hired investigators, contacted every foster home in the state. And now you're telling me it was all for nothing." "We don't know that," Hannah said, stepping closer. "This report doesn't mean she's gone. It just means they stopped looking." Gabriel sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I promised her I'd protect her, that I'd never let anyone hurt her, and I failed." Hannah hesitated, then said softly, "You were a child, Gabriel. You did everything you could." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with anguish. It wasn't enough. The days that followed were tense. Gabriel withdrew into himself, his usual commanding presence replaced by a quiet, simmering pain. Hannah wanted to help him, but she wasn't sure how. Determined to find something, anything, that could give him hope, she returned to her research. The police report had been a dead end, but there were still threads to follow. Late one night, as she scoured public records, she found something that made her heart race. A woman matching Emily's description had been reported living in a small town 3 states away, using a different name. The record was old, nearly a decade, but it was the first real lead she'd found. Hannah printed out the information and brought it to Gabriel the next morning. I found something, she said, setting the printout on his desk. It's not much, but it's a lead. Gabriel picked up the page, his eyes scanning the details. This could be her, he said, his voice laced with cautious hope. It's worth looking into, Hannah said. Gabriel nodded, his resolve hardening. I'll go. I'm coming with you, Hannah said firmly. He hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but we leave today. The drive was long and quiet, the tension between them palpable. Gabriel gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he stared at the road ahead. Hannah watched him from the passenger seat, her heart aching for the man who had spent his life carrying so much pain. They arrived in the small town as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the streets in golden light. The address from the record led them to a modest house on the outskirts of town. Gabriel hesitated as they approached the door, his hand hovering over the knocker. What if it's not her? He asked, his voice barely audible. Then we keep looking, Hannah said gently. But you have to try. He nodded and knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and a woman appeared. She was older than the girl in the photograph, her face lined with years of hardship, but there was no mistaking her. Emily? Gabriel whispered, his voice breaking. The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, she simply stared at him. Then, recognition dawned, and she stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. Gabriel. He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling. I thought I'd never see you again. Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her as if afraid she might disappear again. I've been looking for you, he said, his voice cracking. All these years, I've been looking for you. Tears streamed down Emily's face as she clung to him. I thought you'd forgotten about me. Never, Gabriel said fiercely. I never stopped thinking about you. Hannah watched from a distance, her own eyes brimming with tears. She had brought them back together, but she knew this was only the beginning. The past they had shared was full of pain and unanswered questions, and now they would have to face it together. The silence in the small living room was heavy, filled with emotions too big for words. Gabriel and Emily sat across from each other on a worn couch, the years of separation etched deeply into their faces. Hannah perched on a chair nearby, feeling like an intruder in this intensely personal moment but knowing she couldn't leave. Emily glanced between Gabriel and Hannah, her eyes cautious. You found me, she said softly, almost as if she couldn't believe it. Gabriel nodded, his hands gripping his knees. I've been looking for so long, he said. I thought you were gone, Emily. I thought. His voice broke, and he looked away, his jaw tightening. Emily's gaze softened, though her hands fidgeted in her lap. I thought you'd forgotten about me, she said. When they moved me to that new home, I waited for you. I kept hoping you'd find me, but... She trailed off, her voice tinged with sadness. I tried, Gabriel said, his voice low. I searched everywhere, but no one would tell me where you'd gone. And then the system, it just swallowed us up. I thought... He hesitated, then finished in a whisper. I thought I'd lost you forever. Hannah felt her chest tighten as she listened. The raw pain in Gabriel's voice was unlike anything she had ever heard from him before. This wasn't the cold, calculating CEO she had worked for. This was a man confronting the ghosts of his past, stripped of all pretense. Emily looked down at her hands, her voice trembling as she spoke. It wasn't easy, Gabe. The family they sent me to, they weren't kind. I ran away when I was 14. She paused, her shoulders shaking. After that, it was just one bad place after another. Gabriel's fists clenched, his knuckles white. Why didn't you try to find me? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I didn't think I could. I was so young, and I didn't know where to start. And after a while, I thought you'd moved on. I didn't want to make things worse for you. Gabriel leaned forward, his voice raw. You were my sister, Emily. I would have done anything to find you. You never made things worse. You were the only good thing in my life. Emily blinked rapidly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. Hannah's heart ached at the sight of them. Two people who had been torn apart by forces beyond their control, now fumbling to rebuild the connection they had lost. She felt like an outsider, but she knew her role wasn't finished. There were still questions that needed answers. Emily, Hannah said gently, drawing the woman's attention, do you remember anything about the people who took you? The ones who separated you from Gabriel? Emily hesitated, her brow furrowing as she thought back. It was all so confusing, she said. One day I was with Gabe and the next, these strangers showed up and said I was being moved. They didn't explain why, and when I asked about Gabe, they said it wasn't their concern. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Did they ever tell you why they moved you? No, Emily said, shaking her head. But I always felt like there was something off about it. Like it wasn't just about placement. Like there was another reason. Gabriel leaned back, his mind racing. I don't understand. Why would they separate us like that? There was no reason to. Hannah frowned, a thought forming in her mind. Unless there was something they didn't want you to know, she said slowly. Gabriel looked at her sharply. What do you mean? I mean, Hannah said, choosing her words carefully. What if there was a reason they didn't want you two to stay together? What if someone had a motive for separating you? Emily's face went pale. But why? We were just kids. Gabriel's expression darkened. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Over the next few days, Gabriel and Hannah worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. With Emily's help, they began piecing together the fragments of her past, following the trail of foster homes and records that had marked her journey. One night, while sifting through old case files, Hannah came across something unusual. Look at this, she said, pointing to a scanned document on her laptop. It's a transfer order for Emily's placement, but the signature at the bottom, it's not from the usual social worker. It's from someone higher up. Gabriel leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing. Who is that? Hannah enlarged the signature. Arthur Greaves. He was a director in the foster system back then. It's strange that he would personally approve a transfer for a single child. Gabriel's jaw tightened. What else can we find about him? Hannah typed furiously, searching through public records and news archives. He retired years ago, she said. But there's something here, an article about an investigation into his practices. It says he was accused of unethical behavior, including taking bribes from private parties to influence placements. Emily gasped. You think someone paid him to separate us? It's possible, Hannah said, her tone grim. If someone wanted Emily out of the picture, this would explain how they did it. Gabriel's face darkened, a storm brewing in his eyes. Who would do that? And why? I don't know, Hannah said, but we're going to find out. The revelation left them with more questions than answers, but it also gave them a lead to follow. Gabriel's determination grew fiercer, fueled by the possibility that Emily's suffering and their separation had been orchestrated by someone with a hidden agenda. Emily, for her part, remained quiet but resolute. The years had taken their toll on her, but being reunited with Gabriel had rekindled a spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. As they sat together that evening, Emily turned to Gabriel, her voice soft. Do you think we'll ever find out the truth? Gabriel reached for her hand, his grip firm. We will, he said, no matter what it takes. And for the first time in years, Emily believed him. The discovery of Arthur Greaves' involvement set Gabriel and Hannah on a new course. Emily's transfer wasn't a coincidence. It had been deliberate, orchestrated by someone who had the means and motive to tear her away from her brother. The question that haunted them now was why. Gabriel's determination intensified, his focus sharper than ever. Emily had spent years suffering because of a decision that wasn't hers, and Gabriel was determined to uncover the truth and hold whoever was responsible accountable. The next morning, Gabriel called in a favor from a private investigator he had used in the past. The man, a grizzled but sharp detective named Marcus Hayes, met them in Gabriel's office. His presence brought a new energy to their efforts, and Gabriel wasted no time laying out the details. "We're looking into a man named Arthur Greaves," Gabriel explained, sliding a file across the desk. "He approved a suspicious transfer for my sister when we were in foster care. We believe someone paid him off." Marcus raised an eyebrow, flipping through the file. "Greaves, huh? I've heard his name before. He was dirty, real dirty. But if he took a bribe, he didn't leave a trail. Guys like him know how to cover their tracks." "That's why we need you," Gabriel said. "We need to know who pulled the strings." Marcus nodded, tucking the file under his arm. "I'll see what I can dig up, but don't get your hopes up. If this happened years ago, the trail might have gone cold." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Do whatever it takes." Meanwhile, Hannah continued her own research. She focused on the foster care system and the networks surrounding it, hoping to find connections that might shed light on Greaves' activities. As she worked, she found herself growing more invested in Gabriel and Emily's story. What had started as a chance discovery had become a mission, a way to help two people who had been robbed of their childhood connection. One afternoon, as Hannah combed through records in the office, Emily appeared in the doorway. She looked hesitant, clutching a mug of tea. "Do you mind if I sit with you?" Emily asked. "Of course," Hannah said, motioning to the chair beside her. Emily sat down, her gaze falling on the stacks of documents. "It's strange," she said softly. "All these years, I thought my past didn't matter. I tried to bury it, but now, it's like it's all rushing back." Hannah nodded, her voice gentle. "Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, especially when it's unresolved." Emily hesitated, then asked, "Why are you helping us? This isn't your fight." Hannah looked at her, her expression thoughtful. "Because I know what it's like to feel forgotten," she said. "And because I think everyone deserves a chance to find the truth." Emily smiled faintly, her eyes misting. "Thank you for everything." Days turned into weeks, and the investigation slowly bore fruit. Marcus uncovered a paper trail linking Greaves to several questionable transfers, though the specifics were often obscured. However, one name kept appearing in the background, a man named Henry Calder. Calder was a businessman back then, Marcus explained during a meeting in Gabriel's office. Wealthy, influential, and ruthless. He had a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. Gabriel frowned. Why would he care about a child in the foster system? Marcus shrugged. That's the part one haven't figured out yet. But he had the money to pull strings, and Greaves was on his payroll. Emily's face went pale. "Do you think he had something to do with my transfer?" "It's possible," Marcus said, "but Calder's hard to pin down. If he was involved, he didn't leave much of a trail." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Then we'll make him talk." The next step was to confront Calder directly. Gabriel used his connections to arrange a meeting, leveraging his reputation and resources to gain access. Calder, now retired and living in a sprawling estate, agreed to the meeting, though his tone over the phone had been laced with curiosity and amusement. The meeting took place in Calder's grand library, a room filled with towering shelves of leather-bound books and the faint scent of old paper. Calder, a sharp-eyed man in his 70s, greeted them with a thin smile. "Mr. Vaughn," Calder said, his voice smooth, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Gabriel didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We're investigating a series of foster care transfers linked to Arthur Greaves. Your name came up." Calder's smile didn't falter, though his eyes grew colder. "Greaves? That's a name I haven't heard in years. What does it have to do with me?" "You tell us," Gabriel said, his tone icy. "My sister was taken from me because of a transfer he approved. If you had anything to do with it, I suggest you start talking." Calder chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "You're bold, I'll give you that. But if you're suggesting I had some nefarious hand in your sister's transfer, you're barking up the wrong tree." "Then why does your name keep coming up in his records?" Hannah asked, her voice firm. Calder's smile faded slightly. "Let's just say Greaves and I had a working relationship. He handled placements for some of my philanthropic initiatives." Philanthropy, Gabriel said, his voice dripping with disdain. Is that what you call tearing families apart? Calder's eyes narrowed. Careful, Mr. Vaughn. I don't take kindly to accusations without proof. Gabriel leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. This isn't over. If you're hiding something, I'll find it. Calder's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. I look forward to seeing you try. As they left the estate, Emily turned to Gabriel, her voice trembling. Do you think he knows the truth? Gabriel's expression was grim. He knows more than he's letting on, and I intend to find out exactly what. Gabriel's encounter with Henry Calder left him more determined than ever to uncover the truth. There was no doubt in his mind that Calder knew more than he was letting on. The man's polished exterior and evasive answers only deepened Gabriel's suspicions. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture was still incomplete. Back at the office, Gabriel, Hannah, and Marcus gathered to review their findings. Emily sat quietly nearby, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The emotions of the past few days had taken a toll on her, but her resolve to face the truth remained strong. We know Calder and Greaves had a relationship, Marcus began, pointing to the documents spread out on the table. But we don't know why Calder would have wanted Emily moved, or who might have been pulling the strings behind him. Hannah leaned forward, her brow furrowed. What if Calder wasn't working alone? What if someone higher up orchestrated this? Gabriel nodded, his expression grim. If that's the case, we need to follow the money. Calder's involvement likely wasn't personal. It was transactional. Someone had a reason to separate Emily and me, and Calder was the tool they used to do it. Marcus tapped a finger on the table. I can dig into Calder's financial records, but it's going to take time. He's smart, and people like him don't leave obvious trails. We don't have time, Gabriel said, his voice sharp. If Calder was part of something bigger, we need to find out what it was, and who was behind it. Emily's voice broke through the tense silence. What if it wasn't about us? She asked softly. Everyone turned to her, their expressions questioning. What do you mean? Gabriel asked. Emily hesitated, then said, I keep thinking. Why would someone go to all this trouble? I was just a kid. What if it wasn't about me specifically? What if it was about you? The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his mind racing. Could it be true? Could he have been the target all along? Hannah's research led her to an unexpected discovery. While digging through old business records tied to Calder's ventures, she uncovered a name that caught her attention. Vaughn and Partners. The company had been a small but promising real estate firm, one that Gabriel's parents had owned before their deaths. She brought the information to Gabriel immediately. This firm was dissolved after your parents died, Hannah explained, pointing to the document on her laptop. But before that, it had ties to several of Calder's businesses. It's possible he had dealings with your family. Gabriel stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. What kind of dealings? Land acquisitions, mostly, Hannah said. But here's the thing. There was a lawsuit filed against your parents' firm shortly before the company folded. The plaintiff? Henry Calder. Gabriel's breath caught. He sued my parents? Hannah nodded. It looks like it. The case was dismissed, but the timing is suspicious. Your parents died in a car accident not long after the case was closed. Gabriel's fists clenched. Are you suggesting Calder had something to do with their deaths? I don't know, Hannah admitted, but it's worth looking into. Marcus managed to dig up more about the lawsuit. It turned out Calder had accused Gabriel's parents of fraud, claiming they had misrepresented the value of a piece of land they sold him. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence, but Marcus found a note in the court records that hinted at an out-of-court settlement. It looks like your parents paid Calder off, Marcus said. But whatever happened between them, it wasn't amicable. Gabriel's face darkened. If Calder held a grudge against my parents, he might have targeted me and Emily as a way to get back at them. It's possible, Marcus said, but we need proof. As the pieces began to fit together, Emily's memories started to resurface. She remembered a man visiting their foster home shortly before she was taken away, a man who had spoken to the social workers in hushed tones. She described him to Marcus, and he confirmed her description matched Calder. "He was there," Emily said, her voice trembling. "He was the one who told them to move me." Gabriel's anger burned hotter. Calder hadn't just been involved. He had been directly responsible for tearing their family apart. But why? What could he have gained from separating two children? The team's next step was to confront Calder again, this time armed with more information. Gabriel arranged another meeting, though he knew the man wouldn't be easily intimidated. They arrived at Calder's estate as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grounds. Calder greeted them with his usual smirk, though there was a flicker of unease in his eyes as he noticed the determination on their faces. "Back so soon," Calder said, gesturing for them to sit. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." "We're not here to waste time," Gabriel said coldly. "We know about the lawsuit you filed against my parents." Calder's smile didn't falter, but his eyes grew colder. "Ah yes, that was a long time ago. I'd almost forgotten." "Don't lie to me," Gabriel snapped. "You didn't forget. You targeted my family. And when you couldn't destroy my parents, you came after me and Emily instead." Calder leaned back in his chair, his expression inscrutable. "That's quite the accusation, Mr. Vaughn. Do you have proof?" Gabriel stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "We know you paid Greaves to move Emily. We know you were involved in my parents' downfall. If you think I'll stop digging, you're wrong." Calder's smile faded, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or regret. Then he leaned forward, his voice soft but menacing. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said. "This goes deeper than you can imagine. Walk away, Vaughn, before it's too late." Gabriel's fists clenched, his fury barely contained. "You don't scare me," he said. "And I'm not walking away." Calder stood, his expression hardening. "Then you're a fool." As they left the estate, Gabriel's mind raced. Calder's warning only solidified his resolve. Whatever secrets the man was hiding, Gabriel was determined to uncover them. Gabriel drove back from Calder's estate in silence, the tension in the car so thick it felt suffocating. Beside him, Emily sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. Hannah, seated in the back, was furiously scribbling notes on her tablet, her mind racing to connect the dots. Calder's cryptic warning lingered in Gabriel's mind. "This goes deeper than you can imagine." It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a clue. There was more at play than revenge or greed. Gabriel clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. If Calder thought a veiled threat would stop him, he was sorely mistaken. Back at the office, the team regrouped. Marcus had spent the evening digging further into Calder's financial records, hoping to uncover something concrete. "I found something," he said, pulling up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "Look at this. There are several large transactions from Calder's personal accounts to an offshore trust fund during the time of the lawsuit. The recipient, a corporation listed as a philanthropic initiative. But when I dug deeper, I found the corporation doesn't actually exist. It's a shell." Gabriel frowned. "And what does this have to do with Emily?" "I cross-referenced the dates," Marcus said. "One of the payments lines up exactly with the day Emily was transferred." Emily's face went pale. "So someone was paying him to move me?" "That's what it looks like," Marcus confirmed. "But here's the kicker. The Shell Corporation is tied to a name we haven't seen before, Evelyn Harrington." Gabriel exchanged a glance with Hannah, the name unfamiliar. "Who is Evelyn Harrington?" "She's an investor," Marcus explained. "Old money. She's been tied to a few shady deals over the years, but nothing ever stuck. She's smart and ruthless, a lot like Calder." "What does she have to do with me?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Marcus shrugged. "That's what we need to find out. But based on what I've seen, she was involved in your transfer, and she's been funneling money to Greaves for years." Gabriel's jaw tightened. Then she's the next person we confront. Tracking down Evelyn Harrington wasn't easy. She lived in seclusion on a sprawling estate, surrounded by private security. But Gabriel's connections once again proved invaluable. A carefully worded call to one of Evelyn's business associates secured a meeting under the guise of a potential partnership. The team arrived at her estate late in the afternoon. The house was an imposing structure of glass and steel, set against the backdrop of a lush forest. Evelyn greeted them in a sunlit atrium, her demeanor as cold and polished as the architecture around her. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, her voice clipped, "I was intrigued by your request. What can I do for you?" Gabriel didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We're investigating Arthur Greaves, Henry Calder, and their connections to the foster system. Your name has come up." Evelyn's expression didn't waver, though her eyes sharpened. "I'm not sure what you mean. We know you funneled money to Greaves through a shell corporation," Hannah said, her voice steady. "And we know you were involved in a transfer that separated two siblings, Gabriel and Emily Vaughn." Evelyn's gaze flickered to Emily, lingering for a moment before returning to Gabriel. "You've done your homework," she said. "But if you think I'm going to incriminate myself, you're mistaken." Gabriel stepped forward, his tone icy. "We don't need you to incriminate yourself. We just need to know why. Why go to such lengths to tear apart a family? What did you gain?" For the first time, Evelyn's composure cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her hands tightened on the armrests of her chair. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "It wasn't about you. It was about your father." Gabriel's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Evelyn hesitated, then said, "Your father wasn't the man you think he was. He owed people, powerful people. When he couldn't pay his debts, he offered something else as collateral." Gabriel's stomach turned. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. "He offered you and Emily." The words hung in the air like a bombshell. Gabriel felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him, his carefully constructed understanding of his past crumbling. "That's impossible," he said, his voice shaking. "My father would never." "He didn't have a choice," Evelyn interrupted. "He was desperate. He thought he could buy himself more time. But when the deal fell through, he paid the price." Gabriel stared at her, his mind reeling. "You're saying my parents' accident wasn't an accident?" Evelyn didn't reply, but the look in her eyes was enough. Emily's voice broke through the silence, trembling with emotion. "Why did you take me?" Evelyn's gaze softened. "Because you were the younger one, the easier target. I thought separating you would make it harder for anyone to uncover the truth." "You thought wrong," Gabriel said, his voice cold with fury. Evelyn sighed, leaning back in her chair. "You have your answers. Now what?" Gabriel stepped closer, his fists clenched. "Now we make sure everyone involved pays for what they've done." Evelyn's eyes darkened. "Be careful, Mr. Vaughn. This isn't a game. There are people who would kill to keep these secrets buried." "Let them try," Gabriel said. "I'm not afraid of them." As they left the estate, the weight of Evelyn's revelations pressed down on them. The truth was more horrifying than they had imagined, but it also gave them a renewed sense of purpose. Gabriel turned to Emily, his voice firm. "We're going to finish this. We're going to expose everyone who had a hand in this, no matter what it takes." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Together." Hannah, walking beside them, added quietly, "We've come too far to stop now." They had uncovered the roots of the conspiracy, but the battle was far from over. And Gabriel knew that the deeper they dug, the more dangerous it would become. The revelations from Evelyn Harrington's confession hung heavily in the air, reshaping everything Gabriel and Emily thought they knew about their past. Gabriel's parents, whom he had idolized as paragons of integrity, were now entwined in a web of desperation and betrayal. Emily, torn from him and thrust into a life of hardship, had been a pawn in a game far beyond her understanding. But Gabriel wasn't ready to let the truth lie quietly in Evelyn's mansion. Back at the office, Gabriel, Hannah, Marcus and Emily regrouped. The atmosphere was charged, a mix of determination and dread. "We have the pieces," Hannah said, her tone resolute. "Evelyn confirmed that your parents were coerced, and Calder's role in separating you and Emily is undeniable. But we're still missing the bigger picture. Who was pulling the strings behind all of this? Who were your parents indebted to?" Marcus leaned back, his brow furrowed. "It's possible Evelyn and Calder were just middlemen. If there's someone higher up, they've done a damn good job of staying in the shadows." Emily, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "If my transfer was part of the deal, then there must be records somewhere. Foster homes keep logs, even if they're incomplete." Hannah nodded. "You're right. We need to focus on the foster system records. If we can trace the transfer back to its origin, we might find out who orchestrated it." Gabriel's voice was cold but determined. "Then let's get started." Days turned into sleepless nights as the team sifted through mountains of documents, each discovery leading to more questions. Marcus used his network to dig into archived foster system files, while Hannah tracked financial records that might tie Evelyn's transactions to a larger entity. Emily, though shaken, insisted on helping, determined to face the truth no matter how painful. One evening, Hannah uncovered something that made her heart race. "Look at this," she said, motioning Gabriel over to her screen. "It's an internal memo from the foster care system, dated the same week as Emily's transfer. It mentions a special placement program, funded by an anonymous donor." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Anonymous?" Hannah nodded. "But here's the thing, there's a reference to a private meeting between Arthur Greaves and a representative from a company called Haven Enterprises. Ever heard of it?" Gabriel shook his head. "No, but we can find out." Haven Enterprises proved elusive. It was registered under a series of shell corporations, each one more opaque than the last. But Hannah's relentless research finally uncovered a connection. Haven was tied to a private equity firm run by a man named Lionel Drake. Drake was a name Marcus recognized immediately. "Drake's a ghost," Marcus explained. "He doesn't show up in photos, doesn't give interviews, but he's one of the most powerful men in the country. His firm specializes in acquisitions, and not the legal kind. If he's involved, it means this wasn't just about your family. It's part of something bigger." Gabriel's face darkened. "Then we go after Drake." Arranging a meeting with Lionel Drake was nearly impossible. The man was notoriously reclusive, and his offices were heavily guarded. But Gabriel used his reputation and resources to force Drake's hand. He sent an ultimatum through an intermediary: meet or face public exposure of his connection to Haven Enterprises. Drake agreed. The meeting took place in a high-rise office building, the kind of sterile, imposing environment that reeked of power and control. Gabriel, Hannah, and Marcus entered the conference room to find Drake waiting for them. He was an older man, his silver hair impeccably groomed, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Mr. Vaughn," Drake said smoothly, gesturing for them to sit. "I must admit, your persistence is impressive. What can I do for you?" Gabriel didn't bother with pleasantries. "We know about Haven Enterprises and its connection to the foster care system. We know about Evelyn Harrington and Henry Calder. What we don't know is why. Why did you target my family?" Drake's expression didn't change, but his eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "Your family was not the target," he said calmly. "Your father made poor decisions, and I simply capitalized on them." "Capitalized how?" Gabriel demanded. Drake leaned back, his hands steepled. "Your father's company controlled valuable land I needed for a project. When he couldn't repay his debts, I saw an opportunity to leverage his situation. Separating you and your sister was collateral damage." "Collateral damage?" Gabriel repeated, his voice rising. "You destroyed our lives." Drake shrugged. "Business is rarely clean, Mr. Vaughn. You were a means to an end. Nothing more." Hannah, her voice steady despite the tension, asked, "What project was so important that you were willing to ruin a family?" Drake's smile was thin. That information is above your pay grade. Gabriel slammed his hands on the table, his fury barely contained. You think this is over? I'll bring you down. I'll expose everything. Drake's expression hardened. Be careful, Mr. Vaughn. You're playing a dangerous game. If you value what's left of your family, I suggest you walk away. Gabriel's eyes blazed with determination. I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not walking away. Drake stood, his demeanor icy. Then I wish you luck. You'll need it. As they left the building, the gravity of the situation hit them. Lionel Drake wasn't just a businessman. He was a puppet master, pulling strings in the shadows. Gabriel knew they had poked a sleeping giant, but he also knew they couldn't stop now. We need a plan, Marcus said as they regrouped in the car. Drake's not going to back down, and he's got the resources to make our lives hell. Gabriel nodded, his jaw set. Then we take him down piece by piece. We expose everything: Calder, Evelyn, Greaves, Haven Enterprises. We shine a light on all of it. Emily, her voice trembling but resolute, added, no matter what it takes. Gabriel reached for her hand, his grip firm. No matter what it takes. The battle was far from over, but they had uncovered the heart of the conspiracy. Now it was time to dismantle it. Gabriel's determination burned brighter than ever. Lionel Drake's cold admission and veiled threats had solidified his resolve to expose the web of corruption that had destroyed his family. But as the team regrouped, the reality of the fight ahead became clear. They were up against powerful forces, and the stakes had never been higher. Back at the office, Gabriel, Hannah, Marcus, and Emily reviewed their strategy. The revelations about Lionel Drake and Haven Enterprises gave them a focal point, but it also meant they were targeting a man with nearly unlimited resources and influence. We can't take him down directly, Marcus said. Drake's too insulated. If we go at him head-on, he'll bury us in legal battles before we can make a dent. Then we hit him where it hurts, Gabriel said, his voice cold. We expose the people who worked for him: Evelyn, Calder, Greaves. We make it impossible for him to hide. Hannah nodded. We've already gathered enough evidence to implicate Calder and Evelyn. If we leak it strategically, it could force them to turn on Drake to save themselves. Marcus leaned back, his brow furrowed. It's a good plan, but we need to be smart about it. Once we start releasing this information, Drake will come after us with everything he's got. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Let him. I'm ready. Emily, who had been quiet, spoke up. What about the foster system? If we can prove that Drake's shell corporations were funding illegal placements, it could bring federal scrutiny. Hannah's eyes lit up. That's a great point. If we can tie the transactions to specific placements, like Emily's transfer, it could blow the whole thing wide open. The team divided their efforts. Marcus focused on tracing the financial records back to Haven Enterprises, while Hannah worked on compiling the evidence into a cohesive narrative. Gabriel began reaching out to journalists and whistleblower organizations, preparing to release the information to the public. Emily, determined to contribute, began revisiting her own memories of the foster system. She wrote down everything she could remember about her placements, the people she interacted with, and any details that might help connect the dots. Late one night, as the team worked in Gabriel's office, Emily hesitated before speaking. There's something I haven't told you, she said quietly. Gabriel looked up from his laptop, his expression softening. What is it? Emily's hands trembled as she held a piece of paper. I found this years ago in one of the homes I was placed in. It's a letter signed by Arthur Greaves. He was talking about me. Gabriel took the letter, his eyes scanning the page. The contents made his stomach churn. To whom it may concern, this placement is part of a confidential arrangement. The child, Emily Vaughn, is to be transferred as directed by the benefactor. No deviations from the outlined plan will be tolerated. Sincerely, Arthur Greaves. Gabriel's fists clenched. This proves they were targeting you. This wasn't about the system, it was about control. Hannah took the letter, her mind racing. If we can tie this to Haven Enterprises, it's game over. This document shows intent, and Greaves's involvement directly links him to Drake. Emily's voice wavered. I kept it all these years, but I didn't know what to do with it. I was scared. Gabriel placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. You don't have to be scared anymore. We're going to use this to make sure no one else goes through what you did. The next step was to confront Arthur Greaves directly. Marcus tracked him down to a modest retirement home, where the once powerful man lived in quiet obscurity. Gabriel and Marcus approached him one afternoon, their presence immediately unnerving the aging social worker. What do you want? Greaves asked, his voice trembling as he opened the door to his room. The truth, Gabriel said, stepping inside. We know about your involvement in my sister's transfer. We know about the payments from Haven Enterprises. It's time you came clean. Greaves slumped into a chair, his face pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus pulled out the letter Emily had kept, holding it up. Then maybe you can explain this. Greaves's eyes widened, and his hands trembled. Where did you get that? It doesn't matter, Gabriel said coldly. What matters is that it proves you were part of a scheme to separate my family. Who gave the order? Greaves hesitated, his gaze darting toward the door as if considering escape. But the weight of years of guilt seemed to collapse on him all at once. He buried his face in his hands, his voice muffled. It was Drake, he admitted. He told me to separate you and your sister. He said it was part of a larger arrangement, but he never told me why. I was just following orders. Gabriel's fury boiled over. You ruined lives because you were just following orders? Do you even understand what you've done? Greaves looked up, tears streaming down his face. I didn't have a choice. He threatened me, said he'd destroy my career, my family. I was terrified. Gabriel leaned closer, his voice low and dangerous. And now you're going to make it right. You're going to testify, and you're going to give us everything you have on Drake. Greaves nodded shakily. Okay, I'll help you. Just, please, don't let him find me. With Greaves's testimony secured, the team moved quickly to compile their evidence. They leaked the letter, the financial records, and Greaves's confession to a trusted journalist, ensuring the story would gain maximum exposure. Within days, the story exploded. News outlets picked up the scandal, exposing Haven Enterprises' connection to illegal foster placements and Lionel Drake's role in the conspiracy. Public outrage was immediate, and pressure mounted for an official investigation. But Gabriel knew the fight wasn't over. As the media storm grew, so did the danger. Drake, now cornered, was unlikely to go down without a fight. And Gabriel, Emily, and the team braced themselves for whatever retaliation might come. The media storm surrounding Haven Enterprises and Lionel Drake spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed of corruption, illegal foster placements, and broken families. Public outrage mounted, with calls for a federal investigation. Gabriel and his team had succeeded in shining a light on the shadowy dealings that had torn his family apart. But they knew this was only the beginning. Drake was cornered, and a man like him wouldn't go down quietly. The backlash was swift. Gabriel received a series of anonymous threats, emails, letters, even a phone call in the dead of night. The messages were clear. Stop the investigation or face the consequences. Emily, too, began to feel the pressure. One morning, she found a note slipped under her apartment door. You should have stayed lost. Her hands shook as she read the words, fear gripping her chest. She called Gabriel immediately. They're threatening me, she said, her voice trembling. Gabriel's response was immediate and firm. Pack your things. You're staying with me until this is over. Marcus heightened security measures, hiring private guards to watch over Gabriel, Emily, and Hannah. But the tension was palpable. Drake's reach was vast, and his desperation made him dangerous. One evening, as the team gathered at Gabriel's estate to review the latest developments, Marcus delivered grim news. Drake's lawyers have filed a defamation suit, he said, tossing a thick stack of papers onto the table. He's claiming the story is fabricated and demanding damages. Gabriel scoffed. Typical. He's trying to scare us into backing down. It's more than that, Marcus said. "This isn't just about the lawsuit. It's about silencing you. If this goes to court, he'll use it to delay the investigation and discredit your testimony." Hannah frowned. "What's our defense?" Marcus smirked. "The truth. We have evidence, Greaves's testimony, financial records, the letter. Drake's suit won't hold up under scrutiny, but it's going to be a fight." Gabriel leaned forward, his voice cold. "Then we fight. Drake won't intimidate us into silence." As the lawsuit loomed, the team doubled down on their efforts to build their case. Greaves's testimony was critical, but they needed more to solidify their position. Hannah continued digging into Drake's financial dealings, while Marcus worked on gathering statements from other former foster children who had been affected by the illegal placements. Emily, despite her fear, insisted on being part of the fight. She began speaking with journalists, sharing her story to humanize the scandal and bring attention to the victims. Her courage inspired others to come forward, and soon, the media was flooded with heartbreaking accounts of children torn from their families. One night, as Gabriel and Emily sat together in his living room, she broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel looked at her, his expression softening. "We will," he said firmly. "But it's going to take time. People like Drake don't give up easily. But neither do we." Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes were weary. "I just want to feel safe again." "You will," Gabriel promised. "I'll make sure of it." Drake's retaliation escalated. One evening, as Gabriel and Hannah worked late in the office, the power suddenly went out. Moments later, a rock crashed through the window, shattering glass across the room. Gabriel rushed to the window to see a figure disappearing into the night. Hannah called the security team, her hands shaking. "This is getting out of control," she said. Gabriel's face was a mask of fury. "Let him come. The more desperate he gets, the more mistakes he'll make. And when he does, we'll be ready." The turning point came when Hannah uncovered a critical piece of evidence. A memo from Haven Enterprises detailing a secret meeting between Lionel Drake, Evelyn Harrington, and several high-ranking officials in the foster care system. The memo outlined their plans to use foster placements as leverage in real estate deals, exploiting vulnerable children for financial gain. "This is it," Hannah said, her voice trembling with excitement. "This ties everything together. We have proof of Drake's direct involvement." Gabriel's eyes burned with determination. "Then it's time to end this." The team handed the memo over to federal investigators, who launched a full-scale inquiry into Haven Enterprises and its associates. The investigation quickly gained traction, with subpoenas issued to Drake, Evelyn, and other key players. The media frenzy intensified as new details emerged. Gabriel and Emily became the faces of the fight, their story resonating with millions. Public support swelled, with protests and petitions demanding justice for the victims. Drake, now cornered, made one final attempt to silence Gabriel. Late one night, a fire broke out at Gabriel's estate, forcing him, Emily, and Hannah to evacuate. The fire department determined it was arson, though the perpetrators remained unidentified. Gabriel stood outside his burning home, his fists clenched as flames consumed the building. "This ends now," he said, his voice like steel. As the investigation closed in on Drake, cracks began to appear in his defenses. Evelyn Harrington, faced with overwhelming evidence, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. Her testimony revealed the full extent of the conspiracy, implicating Drake and his network of accomplices. Drake was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. The courtroom was packed as the trial began, with Gabriel and Emily sitting in the front row, their presence a symbol of resilience and justice. As Drake was led away in handcuffs, Gabriel turned to Emily, his voice steady. "It's over." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We did it." But the fight had left its mark. Gabriel and Emily knew they couldn't erase the pain of the past, but they had reclaimed their story and their future. As they stood outside the courthouse, reporters clamoring for comments, Gabriel put an arm around Emily. "We didn't just fight for us," he said. "We fought for everyone who's ever been silenced. And we won." The courtroom's echoing finality, with Lionel Drake sentenced to decades in prison, marked the end of one chapter but the beginning of another. Gabriel and Emily had won a battle not just for justice, but for their sense of identity. Still, the scars left by years of separation and trauma were not easily erased. Gabriel spent the following weeks rebuilding, not only his physical home, which had been destroyed by the fire, but also the emotional bridges between himself and Emily. The victory felt hollow without addressing the rift left by years of misunderstanding, loss, and pain. One afternoon, Gabriel and Emily sat together in the garden of Gabriel's temporary home, the air heavy with the scent of blooming flowers. Emily plucked at a loose thread on her sweater, her gaze distant. "I never thought I'd see the day where I could feel safe," she admitted softly. Gabriel watched her, his expression unreadable. "You deserve to feel safe, Emily. You deserve so much more than what life gave you." She looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "But what about you? You've spent so long fighting for me. For this. What about what you deserve?" Gabriel hesitated, the weight of her question settling over him. "I've spent years burying myself in work, pretending that what happened didn't matter. Finding you, it gave me a purpose I didn't know I needed." He paused, his voice softening. "But maybe now we both need to figure out what comes next." Emily nodded, her tears spilling over. "I don't know how to start over, Gabriel. I don't even know who I am without all this." "You're my sister," he said firmly. "And that's enough." Meanwhile, Hannah found herself reflecting on her role in the journey. She had started as a bystander, a curious employee who stumbled upon a piece of the past. But now, she was deeply entwined in the lives of Gabriel and Emily. One evening, as she prepared to leave the office, Gabriel stopped her at the door. "Hannah," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned, a small smile on her face. "Yes, I want to thank you," he said, his gaze steady. "None of this would have been possible without you. You didn't have to help us, but you did. And I'll never forget that." Hannah's smile widened, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It wasn't just about helping you," she admitted. "It was about proving to myself that I could make a difference. And you gave me the chance to do that." Gabriel nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "Then I guess we helped each other." As the dust settled, Marcus delivered the final piece of closure. The federal investigation into Haven Enterprises had expanded, uncovering an extensive network of corruption that stretched far beyond Lionel Drake. Dozens of arrests were made, and new policies were implemented to protect vulnerable children in the foster system. For Gabriel and Emily, the knowledge that their fight had made a difference brought a sense of peace. They had turned their pain into a force for good, ensuring that no other family would have to endure what they had. One sunny morning, Gabriel took Emily to visit the site of their childhood home. The house was long gone, replaced by an empty lot overgrown with weeds. But as they stood together, memories of simpler times washed over them. "This is where it all began," Emily said quietly, her voice tinged with both sadness and hope. "And where it all ends," Gabriel replied, his gaze steady. "But it's also where we start over." Emily turned to him, a smile breaking through her tears. "Together. Always," he said. Back at the office, Hannah, now a close friend as much as a colleague, found a letter on her desk. It was from Gabriel, handwritten and heartfelt. "Hannah, I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough for what you've done for me and Emily. You didn't just uncover the truth, you gave us the chance to heal. You reminded me of the strength it takes to face the past, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Whatever comes next, I know we'll face it with the courage you helped us find. Thank you for being part of our family. Gabriel." Hannah folded the letter carefully, a warmth spreading through her chest. She had found her own sense of purpose in helping them, and now she felt ready to move forward with her own life. The story of Gabriel and Emily became a symbol of resilience and justice. Their fight against Lionel Drake and Haven Enterprises inspired change, but more importantly, it brought them back to each other. As they stood together on a crisp autumn evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, Gabriel placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "This is just the beginning," he said. Emily smiled, the light of hope shining in her eyes. "It's our beginning." The story of Gabriel and Emily's fight against Lionel Drake became a national symbol of resilience and accountability. Their faces appeared on news outlets, their voices amplifying the calls for justice and reform. But as the world moved on, they found themselves stepping out of the spotlight, ready to focus on healing and rebuilding their lives. Months had passed since Drake's sentencing, and the air felt lighter. Gabriel, now living in a newly built home on the outskirts of the city, spent his mornings in the garden, a ritual he had adopted as a way to find peace. Emily often joined him, her laughter filling the space as they planted flowers and reminisced about their childhood. Hannah, though no longer working directly for Gabriel, remained a constant presence in their lives. Her friendship with Emily had blossomed, and the two often spent afternoons exploring the city or volunteering at local foster care organizations. "It feels good to give back," Emily said one day as they worked at a community center, helping children create art projects. "Like I'm turning all that pain into something meaningful." Hannah smiled. "You're stronger than you realize, Emily. These kids see that in you." Gabriel, meanwhile, had taken on a new mission, using his resources to support foster care reform. He worked closely with lawmakers and nonprofits, sharing his story and advocating for changes to the system. His name, once associated solely with corporate power, became synonymous with integrity and compassion. One evening, as he prepared for a meeting with a prominent senator, Emily approached him with a small box in her hands. "I found this while I was unpacking," she said, handing him the box. Gabriel opened it to find a collection of old photographs, images of their parents, their childhood home, and the two of them playing in the yard. His breath caught as he flipped through the pictures, memories flooding back. "I thought these were gone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I kept them," Emily said softly. "Even when things were at their worst, I couldn't let them go. I think I was waiting for the day we'd be together again." Gabriel pulled her into a hug, his voice trembling. "We're here now, and we're not letting go again." As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Gabriel's work in foster care reform gained momentum, leading to the passage of new legislation aimed at protecting vulnerable children. Emily found her own calling, becoming a mentor for young people navigating the foster system. Hannah, inspired by her experiences with Gabriel and Emily, decided to pursue a career in investigative journalism, focusing on exposing injustices and advocating for change. On a crisp winter morning, Gabriel, Emily, and Hannah gathered at the site of their childhood home. A plaque had been placed there, commemorating their family's journey and honoring the resilience of all foster children who had faced hardship. Gabriel ran his fingers over the engraved words, "From broken roots, we rise." Emily smiled, her eyes misty. "It's perfect." Hannah nodded. "It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's hope." They stood together, the sun breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light over the plaque. "This is our legacy," Gabriel said, his voice steady. "Not the pain, not the loss, but the strength we found and the change we made." Emily reached for his hand, her grip firm. "Together we found our way back, and now we move forward." Hannah placed a hand on their shoulders, a quiet smile on her face. "And we make sure no one else gets lost in the dark." As they walked away from the plaque, their hearts were lighter, their bonds unbreakable. The journey they had taken, the pain, the revelations, the victories, had forged them into a family stronger than ever before. And as they stepped into the future, they carried with them a promise: to honor the past, to fight for justice, and to always stand together. The end.